Welcome back, boxing fans, to another great show with Sean on boxing. So, today we're going to be talking about the highly discussed up and coming fight card from Saudi Arabia and much, much more. So, stay tuned to that, and we'll get back to you after this message. Welcome back. So, obviously, we've been getting all kinds of breaking news. It hasn't been the most busy week of boxing, but we are getting some fights coming this weekend, which we'll be discussing later on this week. Today, I just wanted to talk about all the hip hop hooray revolving the speculation of this Saudi Arabian card on February 22nd and a lot of the buzz that it's getting. And a lot of the fights were listed aren't even the complete prediction for what, we're potentially going to get as a full card. You could look forward to about 8 high quality events on this card. And that's mental, mental. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let's get to it. So here we go. So obviously the headliners for this fight are Daniel Dubois, and it's being talked about Daniel Dubois fighting ex-world champion Parker. And Joseph Parker, Daniel Dubois is a great heavyweight matchup. Huge. And this is exactly sort of in line with what Saudi Arabian cards are pushing, which is primarily UK boxing fans. I mean, some American boxing fans are in their feelings because some American fighters are obviously going to be on this card. And they feel that these fighters should probably be represented in the US. But the reality is, and we'll discuss it, a lot of these fights wouldn't fucking happen if they were left to their own devices. The fact that Turki Al-Sheikh has big dreams of fights he wants to see. Turkey is kind of like when I was a kid and I'd get my Ring magazine and go to the back. And then I'd just make fantasy matchups of fighters I would love to see fight each other, right? That's what he's doing. The difference is he's literally got the money to make these fights happen. And he's putting on these huge cards, and in a lot of it, more for his own interest than it is for any bigger sort of cause. Because we know these fights aren't necessarily making a profit, right? Specifically in Saudi Arabia, where the crowds are not that big. So, it's not necessarily being driven for a crowd-based type of thing. And if you've been watching soccer, you know that a lot of top soccer players from around Europe have been bought up by the Saudis to put into their professional league, right? Like Ronaldo as an example. Messi was offered, I think, $1 billion contract to go play in Saudi Arabia, and he turned that down to obviously go to America, to Miami. Nobody's even watching these games in Saudi Arabia. At first, people showed some interest, but at this point, it's very infrequent you even hear any news about who's playing and how anyone is playing. It's kind of like when China was trying to buy into the whole sports market through sports washing, which people love to throw around now. And tons of great football players, soccer players, went to China, and literally we never heard from them again, right? It's kind of what's going on in Saudi Arabia right now. But if the money's big, you can't blame players for jumping on it. And this is the same for boxers. If you're going to make the kind of money you will never make elsewhere, why wouldn't you jump at the opportunity to cash out while you can, right? I mean, this may not be around forever, so you better make sure you get your payment early, right? Jump on board while you can. But as far as this card, Daniel Dubois, Joseph Parker, great heavyweight fight, IBF world title fight, right? Parker, obviously a great fighter, was a world champion before, obviously lost his title in unification fight with Anthony Joshua. Since then, has been in great matchups with elite level opponents. Daniel Dubois, similarly. The difference is Daniel Dubois has currently won a world title. Parker, similar to Daniel Dubois, has been in a lot of great performances and has really elevated himself in the heavyweight rankings right now. So this is a really good matchup. It wasn't the fight I was necessarily looking forward to. I was kind of more interested in seeing Kabial, right? who I thought stylistically would have probably been a more explosive matchup for Daniel Dubois. But nonetheless, Parker and Dubois, what a huge fight. Great heavyweight matchup, right? I mean, people that are casual fans or American centric, they will obviously poo poo this and dismiss it and not give it the attention it deserves. But this is exactly why fights are being moved to Saudi Arabia because of this mentality, right? Then, of course, you have the rematch, Beterbiev versus Bivol, a fight that never would have happened in the US. Thank you, Turki Al Sheikh, for making the undisputed light heavyweight title, because without him, this fight never would have happened. And not just did we get it, now we're getting a rematch in one of the best fights of 2024. Very competitive fight. The question is, who's going to be able to make adjustments and be more effective the second time around? And it's really intriguing. Like, this fight is super competitive. Two very different style fighters. One very slick boxer, one aggressive, hunt you down, killer, right? And we saw both of these guys during different points of their matchup really show a high level of boxing skill, right? Beterbiev doesn't necessarily get the attention as being a great boxer, but he showed you that this was really a chess match between these two players, and the real intellect that was behind both of them in their ability to make adjustments throughout the fight consistently. And that's why it was such a great competitive fight. I'm super excited. If this was all we were getting, Dubois, Parker, Beterbiev, Bivol, with a few good, interesting underlying fights, this would be a fantastic event in February. Fantastic event, right? You'll have people that say, oh, PBC fight between Morel and Benavidez is a better card than this. you know, you can't talk to people that have this kind of mentality because, well, that's a great fight and the card is good, right? It's not a bad card, it's good. The difference here is those guys are literally fighting for baby belts at light heavyweight. Here, we get the true elite fighters at 175 rematching in one of the best fights of 2024. And we get a great high level heavyweight world title fight. So that in itself blows away the PBC card. And I ain't dismissing and downplaying. I'm happy the Morel Benavidez fight was done. I wish Tank Davis fight would have been on that card to double head it because it would have been better, more effective, right? Because I know the Morel Benavidez fight card is not going to do great pay-per-view numbers. $85 you're going to be charging, and it's just not going to generate that much money. If you threw Tank Davis on it, it still wouldn't generate huge money. We already saw a doubleheader between Tank Davis and Benavidez previously, and the numbers were mediocre, right? So you would expect similar things in this fight because, well, Morel is a great fighter and hardcore fans are super excited. Casual fans don't know who the fuck David Morel is. And for Tank Davis, it's a similar situation. Nobody knows who this pro box fighter is, right? I know he's a WBA world champion, but that doesn't mean anything unless you're a hardcore fan and you watch the sport. If you're a casual sports fan, you don't know who this guy is. You know Tank Davis is fighting some smaller dude coming up in weight. You expect him to knock him out. They expect David Benavidez to knock out Morel. Those are the expectations, right? In this matchup, Parker and Dubois, anything can happen, literally. And I believe in Morel and Benavidez similarly. Anything can happen. And then Beterbiev and Bivol, anything can happen, right? Real 50-50 matchups. But let's keep scrolling through. So here is the predicted card, and it's great to see that Turki Al Sheikh is doing what people weren't able to do historically. And that's why I don't understand a lot of these American fans who are anti-Turki Al Sheikh, and they're talking about sports washing. Like, America is the most aggressive country in the world as far as using military might to invade, take over governments, and physically try to dominate countries and force them to do what they want. But they're complaining about Saudi Arabia sports washing. And a lot of these people are totally happy with China. right? This is like LeBron James accusing Saudi Arabia of sports washing, but trying to make millions of dollars from China. It's ridiculous, the hypocrisy. But needless to say, the fact that you got Matchroom, Golden Boy, Top Rank, Queensberry, and PBC all co-promoting in a sense on this card together, that is fucking great. Fantastic. You couldn't ask for anything more. This is exactly what we've always wanted in boxing. Promotional companies to work together to make great matchups. So we don't have to wait 5 to 8 years for a fight to mature, right? So what they mean is the fight get to a point where people are willing to spend $80 to $90 to watch the pay-per-view. In this fight, here you got Dubois Parker as the headline. No surprise there. You got Beterbiev versus Bivol. And then, of course, the fight that's getting a lot of negativity from Americans is the Jaron Ennis versus Virgil Ortiz. And as I said, it's a great fight, but it's not a world title fight. It's not the top 2 fights on the card, right? Yet for them, this is the biggest opponent of their career, neither of whom have done anything in the sport. Yes, I know Jaron Ennis has an IBF world title, but that was an email title. He never won the title. He never beat a champion to get the title. Bud Crawford moved to 154, or Jaron Ennis inherited the belt, right? Virgil Ortiz obviously moved up to 154. This fight should happen at 154. I hear speculation that Matchroom and Eddie Hearn are trying to get the fight at 147 for Jaron Ennis' title. If that's the case, there's no chance in fucking hell Virgil Ortiz is going to take that fight. He had health issues that almost fucking ruined his career and put him in a position where he could have died trying to make 147. But now you expect him to try to make the weight again? Get real. Jaron Boots Ennis just talked about how he was thinking of moving up because he's struggling to make the weight. So if that's the case, go fight at 154. If that's not the case, go fight someone else. But if you're going to make this fight, right, it's a great fight. And as I say, this whole card right here, this is the first fight card, first fight that's really focused mostly on Americans. Obviously, UK fans will be excited to see both Virgil Ortiz and Jaron Ennis fight. They've both seen these fighters fight on previous Turkey Al-Sheikh cards, right? And obviously Matchrooms. So they're familiar with the fighters. Obviously, hardcore fans are very familiar with them. But as I say, this is not a huge fight. If you were going to make a Jaron Ennis Virgil Ortiz fight, literally we would not be getting this fight for another 3, 4, fucking possibly 5 years. The fact we're getting it now, when they're primed, is perfect. Perfect. And to be truthful, I don't care who wins because it doesn't matter. A fight like this, I think, is great. And I think whoever wins, whoever loses, I'm not going to be hating on one or the other because the fact that they're taking on this kind of challenge, they should be praised and fucking given tons of props for stepping up. Then another fight that just recently unfolded. It wasn't the fight that was supposed to happen. That was supposed to obviously be Zepeda versus Shakur Stevenson. But apparently Zepeda hurt his hand against Tevin Farmer. So now Floyd Schofield jumped at the chance to fight Shakur Stevenson and fill in. And you got to fucking give Floyd Schofield tons of praise. Because this is what younger up-and-coming fighters want all the time. They want that smoke. They want to jump up and take on the champions, the top level competition. The problem is, what's the benefit for a pound for pound world champion to take on a dude who's never really proven anything yet, who's just a contender, right? And just out of being a prospect. If you beat him, it ain't a fucking surprise. If you lose to him, you were kind of exposed. If you struggle with him, you were kind of exposed. This is what people are going to say, right? So for Shakur, you got to give him tons of praise for fucking doing what he says he's going to do. Man up, willing to fight anyone, right? For Floyd Schofield, he's doing what we expect. Young dudes want the smoke. They want to prove themselves, sometimes too quick. And we will see in this fight if Floyd Schofield is jumping in too quick, especially against such an elite defensive fighter like Shakur Stevenson, which is not an easy fight for anyone. But Shakur can't get Lomachenko. He can't get Tank Davis. You got to fight someone. So Floyd Schofield, fucking great. Great fight. And for either one of these two fighters, it's a big payday. It's an opportunity to make your name for Floyd Schofield. It's an opportunity for Shakur to stay busy and continually build up his recognition and name. And by fighting outside of America, it's great. It builds up his global brand outside of the US, in the UK, in Saudi Arabia, and around the world. And as for a young fighter like him, this is going to pay dividends down the road. So I think it's fantastic, a great matchup. It's too bad it's not Cepeda, but I'm glad to see these guys were still able to jump together and make a fight of this magnitude. Even though, obviously, out of every fight we've talked about so far, this seems like the most one-sided matchup up until this point. Then, of course, you get Carlos Adames defending his WBC middleweight title versus Hamza Shiraz, the great up-and-coming UK fighter. At this division, middleweight, we don't know what's really been going on. There was talk about Adames fighting, what's-his-face, Janibek, and then, of course, there was talk about Janibek ducking Shiraz. Now, recently, Shiraz could have went to purse bid to fight Janibek, but he walked away from that to go fight Carlos Adames. So in the bigger picture, I kind of think it's cool. He can beat Carlos Adames, get the WBC title, and then when he fights Janibek down the road in 2025, it would be for a 3-belt unification. So, that would only make that fight even bigger. And we know skill-wise, Janibek is a more skilled fighter than Carlos Adames. But Carlos Adames is a very good fighter. Power. He's really started to come into his own and really look good, since he's been at middleweight. So it's a great matchup for Hamza Shiraz. It's a big step-up fight for him. Obviously, he's a huge man, so he's going to have size, reach advantage over Carlos Adames. And we will see if he's able to really make a statement. Obviously, the UK fans are going to be all over the Shiraz fight, all over the Daniel Dubois fight. So you got two fights that are really British-centric. Then, of course, you got Beterbiev and Bivol, which is just a global boxing matchup. The Americans, the Brits, they liked the fight, but neither of them were willing to really pay for it. Then, of course, you got the American fight with Jaron Ennis and Ortiz, and Shakur and Schofield. So the card is pretty well split to try to get as much attention from around the world as far as fans. So I'm super excited. So far so good. And we know there's going to be more to be announced on this card as well. We did hear earlier speculation that Bam Rodriguez potentially be fighting Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez potentially on this fight card. I would love to see that. Obviously, I'm a huge Roman Gonzalez fan. Him stepping up to fight Bam right now, it's not a good situation. But at the same time, potentially it's the biggest payday of his career. And at 37 years of age, why not get that cash? For Bam Rodriguez, it's the last of the 4 kings that you put on your resume. So for him, there's legacy attached to it. For Roman Gonzalez, if he's able to beat Bam, man, that just solidifies him as fucking essentially one of the best small fighters ever in the sport of boxing. Ever. Even if he's super competitive at this point, it's just going to confirm what people already have said about him. But that's one fight. We also heard a potential fight between the 2 giants, Bakoli and Zhang, which was potentially on this. So we know the Saudis love the heavyweight matchups, and the heavyweights continuously still get a lot of push on these Saudi cards. So don't be surprised for Bakoli, a guy who really resonates with UK fans, to get that Zhang fight, which would be fucking unbelievable if he threw that on this card as well. I also heard 130-pound IBF world champion Kache, sorry if I butchered his name, another UK fighter, so don't be surprised if that fight's also on this card, even more so than the heavyweight fight, is going to be defending against Sugar Nunez, right? One of the hardest punchers at 130 pounds. So that would be great. It makes sense. If Kache is going to fight such a dangerous fighter, you might as well do it in Saudi Arabia, where you're going to make some coin in the process. So if one of those two fights happens on top of this, dynamite, fucking dynamite, right? Let me know which one you would prefer, the heavyweight matchup or the 130-pound world title fight. So here's some interesting things. Obviously, Dan Kenobi from CompuBox, he's the one who was also putting out that this card could look like this. So the fact that he is echoing a lot of the things we're hearing is good news, because obviously it's saying that these are some real serious conversations. The fight that's probably the most up in the air is probably the Boots Virgil fight, right? Which we could see potentially falling through. The interesting thing is this statement here that the David Morrell, David Benavidez fight is going to cost $89.99 2 weeks earlier in February, whereas the Riyadh season card is going to cost $49.99, literally $40 cheaper, right? And this isn't Saudi Arabia trying to butcher the PBC, right? February 22nd is the beginning of Riyadh season. So it makes sense they're doing it here. The reality is most people thought the PBC's first card was going to be in January. They're the ones who consistently have pushed their cards back. I mean, you know, David Benavidez, Morrell, Tank Davis was supposed to be happening in 2024 and has been pushed back to this date. So it's not like people are trying to purposely step on their toes. And as far as the pay-per-view, Saudi Arabia and Turkey told you they were going to lower pay-per-view costs because they felt that costs were too high and it was hurting the product, right? So even $49.99 is a little higher than I would expect. I would think $39.99, where it comes in at an easy $40, and it's 30 bucks is not a big deal, right? You know, you can't even buy 2 pizzas and a fucking 12-pack of beer for fucking $30. So, you know, it's not really that big of a deal. But, you know, not that I live in North America anymore, but I can imagine that you can't buy 2 pizzas and 12 beers for that much money anymore. I would imagine that would cost somewhere around $65 plus tip and tax. So pushing 80 bucks for 2 pizzas and 12 beers. It's crazy because I remember living in Vancouver, and Sundays after we played volleyball, we would come home and we'd order pizzas and fucking drink beer and just fucking crash out on the sofa. And that was a cheap Sunday meal. But you let me know if my costs are off. Like I said, I haven't lived in North America for 20 years now, so I'm not sure exactly what the prices are there. So here's obviously the matchup, the side-by-side matchup between the cards. Morrell Benavidez obviously is a great fight, but as I said, this is a fight for hardcore boxing fans. Then you got Pitbull versus Fierro. I heard that the Fierro fight is falling off because Fierro's hurt. So we're not sure who Pitbull is going to be fighting or if he's going to be fighting, depending on what happens with that fight, if they find him a replacement opponent. There's lots of time, so it's not really that surprising if they do. Ramos Jr. versus Rosario. It's a good fight for 154 pounds. But for Ramos, it's mostly a bounce back against Rosario, whose best days were like fucking 4 or 5 years ago. And then, of course, Figueroa versus Fulton 2, a matchup that was very competitive back at 122 pounds. Now at 126, Fulton had one fight since he got knocked out by Inui and didn't look that great in that matchup. Figueroa has looked good, but hasn't been so active. So really outside of Benavidez and Morrell, there's not really a fight on this card that's really that interesting, right? Not really. I would say 99% of people would pick Figueroa to win the rematch. Everybody's going to pick Pitbull to beat Fierro. Most people are going to pick Ramos Jr. to pick Rosario. Even Benavidez versus Morrell. The majority of people are picking Benavidez to beat Morrell. So, you know, the favorites are really heavy favorite to win. With Bivol Beterbiev, it's a split. Better Biev already won, but because Bivol was so competitive, people honestly could feel him making adjustments, being the younger man, winning the rematch, potentially putting on a trilogy. That would be great. Dubois Parker, anyone could win, literally. Boots versus Virgil, anyone could win. Shakur Schofield, obviously Shakur is going to be heavy favorite. Adama versus Shiraz, anyone could win. Like literally, you have 4 50-50 fights on that card. With this fight card from the PBC, I think Benavidez Morales a 50-50 fight. But I think when you look at the betting favorites, none of the fights on this card are going to be considered 50-50 fights. And unfortunately, a lot of PBC cards tend to be that way. They tend to be showcase fights more than legitimate 50-50 matchups, right? You can disagree with me, but this is the truth. Another thing that's really up in the air is this whole Funduro Errol Spence fight, which of course apparently was agreed to in October in Dallas, but now it's fucking November. So, and Errol Spence recently just came out and said he hasn't heard anything about this fight for months. 4 months. And we still don't know if he's got a new trainer or exactly what's going on with regards to what he's doing to get prepared for any fight upcoming. So, and the irony is we know Funduro had a purse bid with Bud Crawford, and they came to terms, meaning that most of us felt that meant Funduro Spence was going to happen. Bud Crawford was going to allow that fight to happen so that he could fight the winner, which makes lots of sense. But how long is Crawford going to have to wait? Because we've already been waiting fucking October, November, December, January, February. That fight's not going to happen until February, possibly March. Don't be surprised if this fight is on the Tank Davis undercard, right? That would probably be the most likely scenario if the fight does happen. And meanwhile, we've been talking about this fight for how long? At that point, it's going to be almost 1 year since Funduro beat Tim Tszyu to become a unified champion, and Errol Spence stepped into the ring to challenge him, right? So any momentum you had has long fucking dissipated. But you let me know. Is this a fight you're interested in? So here's some fights that have been mentioned. Of course, we had the Funduro Spence fight that was supposed to happen in October. Don't know what's happening with that. But we do hear the WBO has officially ordered Arnold Barboza Jr. versus Jack Catterall as a final eliminator for a shot versus Teofimo Lopez's WBO super lightweight title. And my question is, really? Like, out of all the sanctioned bodies, I respect the WBO the most. But in this case, they really look like they're fucking protecting Teofimo Lopez. Because Barboza's been right there as his mandatory for fucking a couple of years now, right? He just beat Ramirez, who was ordered to fight fucking Lopez, but didn't want to fight him. So you beat Ramirez, but you still don't get a shot with Lopez. Catterall literally fucking came back and beat Taylor in the rematch, and then just fought Regis fucking Prograis. But that's not enough to get him a Teofimo Lopez fight. Now he got to fight Barboza. Like, these guys are doing what the champion isn't doing. Teo is not taking on opponents like Josh Taylor, Regis Prograis, and Jose fucking Ramirez. He ain't taking on any opponents at that level. Everyone he's fighting is low fucking level. Since, of course, he beat Taylor. So how are these guys needing to do so much when he needs to do so fucking little? Truthfully, I think they should strip his ass, put him champion in recess, allow these two guys to fight for the belt. Because Teo could have fought this year, but he walked away from the fight, right? Had an opportunity to go to 147 and try to become a three-weight world champion, walked away from that fight, right? Like, God only knows when he's interested. And really, this is what's killing American boxing. This kind of fucking prima donna behavior from these fighters, whether we're talking about fucking Tank Davis, whether we're talking about Devin Haney, Teofimo Lopez, any of these guys who think that they're so fucking elite that they don't need to do what's expected of them. And then they expect boxing fans to be excited with them taking on subpar opposition, right? Like, I think it's very fucking unfortunate that the WBO is making these two fighters take on this kind of challenge after everything they've did in the last fucking year. And in truth, it's not even a fight boxing fans want to watch, because stylistically, it don't look like a fucking fight that's going to be fun to watch, right? At least if you throw one of these guys, Lopez or Catterall, in with Lopez, Barboza and Catterall in with Lopez, now at least you have an interesting style matchup. But you throw these two guys together, one guy who's a counterpuncher, one guy who's a defense first fucking fight behind a jab fighter, it could be a boring fucking fight, right? Boring. And it's not even for a world title. So fucking explain that to me. I don't understand all the kickback here. I know Carissa is doing what she always does, fucking moaning and groaning, acting like she's the victim. But the reality is, Katie Taylor Serrano 2 was just watched by 74 million people. And you can say because it wasn't a headliner, because it was on the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul undercard. The reality is, this was the fight every real boxing fan was talking about. Not Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. No fucking real YouTube channel on YouTube was excited about Jake Paul and fucking Mike Tyson. Nobody was making videos hyping that shit up. What people were talking about was Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano fucking 2. Because the first fight was one of the best fights in women's boxing history. Sold a huge venue in America, more than fucking Teofimo Lopez sells when he fights in New York, right? But Carissa Shields want you to believe that her fight with the UK girl is the biggest, most watched female fight in the history of the sport. But that ain't even fucking close to the truth. And the truth is, that fight was successful not because of Carissa Shields, but because of UK boxing fans who were supporting the UK boxer. That's why it did 2 million views in the UK. We see Clarissa Shields fight in the US. No one fucking pays attention. No one gives a fuck. And that's why the rematch with her and that girl isn't happening. Because Clarissa Shields is delusional, or as my supervisor at work says, delulu. And she thinks they should do the rematch in the US. Yet she still expects to make over $1 million to do that rematch. But yet that fight won't generate fucking anything in the US, because American fans who support Carissa Shields are kind of like American fans who support Juju Watkins. Is that her last name? Juju? What's Juju's last name? But Juju's a great college basketball player, and people think she's going to be the Michael Jordan of the WNBA. She's going to be bigger than CC, right? And she should be the face of the sport. But unfortunately, the same people that say that don't fucking watch her fight, her sporting events. And this is the same with Shields. All these people over social media talking fucking out their ass, they don't watch her fights. They don't pay for them. They don't watch them. It shows in the number. The numbers are shit. Piss poor. You couldn't do that rematch in the US because it wouldn't generate the money that's necessary to pay both of those girls. That's why it was going to be redone in the UK, because there, both women would have made over $1 million. It would have fucking did over 2 million views. It would have been very successful in the UK. Taylor Serrano is a fight that's happened twice in the US and been super successful both times. And yeah, 74 million people watched that fight. Whether they tuned in to watch that fight or they tuned in to watch Mike Tyson and Jake Paul, it don't matter. They tuned in, and this is the fight they watched. The most watched women's boxing fight in the history of female boxing, and probably a number that is never going to be broken. It's very unlikely you're ever going to have another female boxing event that's seen by 74 million people globally? Unlikely, right? And no matter how much Clarissa Shields cries, moans, and kicks and throws her toys out of the pram, it ain't going to change that. I'm sorry, sister. It just ain't going to change that. And the next fight you do in the US ain't going to fucking do a million fucking views. Not even close. Right? Serrano and Taylor were just paid over $6 million by Netflix. Netflix didn't pay them shit pay because they were an inconsequential fucking fight on a Tyson Jake Paul fight card. Because if that was the case, Netflix wouldn't have paid them $6 million each. They got paid higher than any woman boxer in the history of fucking female boxing has ever been paid. I think Shields' highest payday was 1.45 million. So, not bad. Right? I would be happy. But let's keep it in context. It ain't that much compared to 6.1 million. She's jealous. And that's what this comes down to. And this isn't hating on Clarissa Shields. This is just true. She's jealous. She's jealous because she thinks that she's fucking the face of female boxing, but she's not. Because even the people all over social media that represent her and hype her up, they don't watch her events. It shows in the numbers. Right? It's like Juju Watkins, Paige Beckers, right? They're playing college basketball this year, 2024. The numbers for their games aren't fucking great. Not on TV and not live. Whereas Caitlin Clark, her numbers last year were fucking ridiculous. That's why almost every single game of hers was shown on TV, because the numbers were fucking crazy. People were just gravitating to her. They're not gravitating to them. And this is the same with Serrano and Taylor. I mean, and the irony is Taylor doesn't even fucking talk, right? But she's got something Shields doesn't have, which is a hardcore fan base that supports her. And that's Ireland. And that's why if they do a trilogy, the fight should happen in fucking Ireland. Because after 2 fights in the US, both of which Katie Taylor won, the third fight should totally happen in Ireland because Irish fans deserve it. But let me know what you think. Is Clarissa Shields the face of female boxing in the world? I mean, in the States, is she the face of female boxing in the States? I don't know. She doesn't even have a major promoter behind her. Unlike Taylor, and I guess now Serrano with Jake Paul. Interesting enough, December is the month for Japanese boxing. These are some of the big fights happening this December in Japan. Japan always represents hard in December. Obviously, the 30th and 31st, 29th of December, that New Year's time is huge for Japanese boxing. I just saw True School Sports was just in Japan for the second time, and I'm like, okay, I live so close. I'm going to go watch boxing in Japan this time next year for New Year's Eve. I get time off work at that time, so I'm going to go watch a boxing event in Japan. It's just Japan is pretty fucking cold in December. Do I really want to put myself through that? Taiwan is not bad. I'm sitting here in t-shirts and shorts, and there's no heat in houses in Taiwan. I don't know if I want to suffer through the cold in Japan, but obviously there's going to be big events. So that's my thing. For next year, that's my goal. My goal is to go watch an event for the 29th, 30th, or 31st in Japan, maybe 2 of them. So obviously, these are some of the fights. I'm excited. Inouye is fighting for the 3rd time this year against Goodman. Of course, a lot of haters are hating. The reality is it's crazy how these people fucking think, right? And we know where it comes from. It's just deep hatred of anyone not like themselves. Because the truth is, Inouye's fighting the 3rd time this year. He's fighting his mandatory. Where's the fucking argument when a guy's fighting is mandatory? It's not his fault. People are mandated. It's just his job to fight his mandatories. And until there's a bigger potential opponent available, like we're going to get next year in Chunto Nakatani, you might as well fucking get all your mandatories out of the way so you can do what you want when the time comes. Fighting Goodman, who's a mandatory for 2 sanctioning bodies, not 1, 2. 2 sanctioning bodies have him as the #1 ranked mandatory opponent for the monster. And ironically enough, when you look at his career, he beat TJ Dahoney before Inouye did. He beat Reese Alim. And I know people were kicking back going, you just say that because you're trying to hype up Goodman. I'm not trying to fucking hype up Goodman. Literally, people were saying that Reese Alim was the boogeyman of 122 pounds when fucking MJ Akhmedov, Fulton, and Reese Alim were there. No Inouye. So this isn't me hyping him up because I'm trying to hype up Inouye. No, this is before Inouye was even at this weight class, right? This is what people were saying about Reese Alim. If you don't believe me, that's too bad because, it's not my job to convince you of fucking reality, right? You can walk around and say fucking the earth is flat and I can fucking say the earth is round because all facts fucking point to that. It's not my job to try to convince you. If you want to be fucking deluded and think fucking the earth is flat, okay, fucking do you, buddy. I'm not going to go back and forth arguing about fucking the world being flat. The reality is this is what people were saying about Reese Alim. Whether you believe it, whether it was true, that's what people were saying. The guy that beat him and knocked him off the pedestal wasn't MJ and wasn't Stephen Fulton. It was Sam Goodman. And the irony is, we've seen other opportunities where Australian fighters that weren't getting a lot of attention went on to surprise everybody, right? Liam Paro, perfect example at 140 pounds. He just beat the boogeyman of 140 in fucking Subriya Matias, who, like Reese Alim, was being called the boogeyman of that weight class. And the Australian fighter went in there as the underdog that everyone thought was going to get knocked out, went out there and put a masterclass performance beating Subriya Matias, right? And maybe he'll lose to Richard Hitchens. Maybe he will. Or maybe he'll continue to do what he's been doing all along and upset the apple cart and beat Hitchens and move forward in his career, right? And maybe Goodman is exactly the same as that, right? I don't understand these people that are always looking for some reason to fucking hate on people and don't want to give people any credit at all. You don't need to fucking hype it up and say a guy's pound for pound #1 because he beat Sam fucking Goodman, right? Nobody's saying that, but it's his mandatory. Sam Goodman has done what he had to do to be put in this position, unlike many other mandatories, i.e. a guy like fucking William Skull, who became the IBF mandatory for Canelo Alvarez. And Canelo was stripped because he didn't fight him. So we know the IBF would be happy to strip Inouye as well, because they strip fucking everyone. But there you go. I saw these quotes. I thought it was pretty interesting. Obviously, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. came out. I was surprised. He was commenting on Floyd Mayweather saying, he's a fighter. I don't like to be honest. In other words, he's saying, I don't want to be critical. I don't want to shit on him because he's a fighter like myself. So I respect him. But I think if he would have faced the fighters from the 80s and 90s, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He's chosen his opponents. And that was a criticism for Floyd Mayweather a lot during his career. This doesn't dismiss the great things he did, because obviously he did tons of great things. And it's ironic. I was talking to a guy today who's got a channel on YouTube who's a Flomo. And, when have we used the word Flomo? Most of these people that were Flomos have disappeared from the YouTube boxing community because Floyd is retired and they don't need to dick ride Floyd Mayweather like they did for years. The only guy who's still around dick riding Floyd is Dante's Boxing Nation, who literally had his lips surgically fucking attached to Floyd's ass, right, years ago. But this guy was talking about Bud Crawford and talking about how Bud Crawford is easily #1 fighter in boxing today because he's 41-0. And I said, so if you have the most wins and no losses, that means you're the best fighter ever? And he said, yeah, like Floyd, who retired 50-0 and is considered the best fighter of all time. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Considered the best fighter of all time by fucking who? Because most of the real legitimate rankings of best fighters of all time don't have Floyd Mayweather number one. Let's just Google it. Top 10 fighters of all time, pound for pound list. See, this list right here, written by Jonathan Parsons, says the 10 greatest pound for pound fighters in history. Floyd Mayweather is definitely not number one. Muhammad Ali is number one. Sugar Ray Robinson is number two. Joe Louis number three. Floyd four. Duran, Marciano. Right? Ali had losses, I think six. Robinson had losses. Joe Louis had losses. Floyd didn't. Duran had losses. Marciano didn't. The two guys that literally were undefeated are not in the top three on this list. Right? I mean, being undefeated is great, but a lot of times what it means is you didn't fight the guys you should have fought, right? That was a criticism towards Marciano his whole fucking career, right? That he was at the perfect time where Joe Louis and them were too old, and then he retired before fucking what's his face, Sonny Liston, right? So ducking Sonny Liston, fighting old fighters that were just past their prime, and he was in the perfect period of time where he didn't have the elite competition, right? So people always are critical. You think about Ricardo Lopez, when they talk about these kind of records, they don't mention Ricardo Lopez, right? Munsari literally had a better record than Floyd Mayweather. I think he was 51-0. Nobody was calling Munsari the best fighter in boxing history because he was 51-0. You get many Thai fighters that end up having records like 50-something and 0, 60-something and 0. They end up being like 70-something and 1. Does this mean they're one of the top 10 fighters in boxing today? Nobody puts these guys in the top fucking 10 pound for pound, even though they have these records. Records don't tell the whole story. We look at fighters from Argentina, Venezuela primarily, Thailand, and they have blown up records against weak competition. What tells you you're great is the competition you fought. And when you fight great competition, inevitably, you're going to lose fights. But you come back and win in rematches, that elevates you. It shows you how great you are, that you can make adjustments to beat guys the second time around to show your dominance over them, even though they might have beat you the first time, right? Azuma Nelson is a great example of that. Azuma Nelson, the professor, lost multiple fights, and then on multiple occasions came back and beat guys in rematches. That's what he did. He wanted to rematch Pernell Whitaker. Pernell didn't want to rematch him. Azuma Nelson says Pernell ducked the rematch because he knew I would make adjustments and beat him in the rematch. I don't think that's true, but based on his history, he's got a valid point, right? Valid point. So I ain't hating on Floyd. I mean, Julio Cesar Fez can say what he wants. When we look at what he's done, he had over 100 victories on his resume, but a lot of the opponents he fought were cherry-picked, mediocre guys, right? Floyd didn't fight the low level of opposition Julio Cesar Chavez fought. I mean, okay, initially when he first became pro. And then after a certain point, most of the fighters he fought were all top 10 ranked contenders, right? Whether you think they were great or not, they were all top 10 contenders. They were all guys that were ranked in the top of their weight class. They might not have been the elite guys, the best guys, stylistically the toughest matchups, but they were all good fighters. So it wasn't like he was cherry picking bum ass opponents. I went back and showed people multiple times Pernell Whitaker and how he fought some straight up bums on his resume. And historically, guys could get away with that. And it was normal. Nowadays, you can't really do that because you'd be so heavily criticized by fighting anyone. Look at, people shitting on Roman Gonzalez for making a homecoming fight against a guy with a bad resume. But yet it was a homecoming fight. He'd already fought tons of world champions, became a three-weight world champion, was then inevitably afterwards moved up to become a four-weight world champion, but he's being criticized because he fought one cherry pick who had double-digit losses. Because this is how thirsty people are to find excuses to hate on some people. Let's look at this, yardbarker.com, the best 25 fighters of all time. Oh, they look legitimate. So number one, there you go, Sugar Ray Robinson. Most lists have Sugar Ray Robinson as the best fighter in boxing history, right? With Muhammad Ali number two. That's generally the consensus. The other list had Ali number one, Sugar Ray number two, Hammer and Hank number three, right? A lot of lists don't have him so high. Harry Greb number four. This list is pretty fucking serious. Willie Pep number five. Roberto Duran number six. I think Duran over Floyd. That ain't a stretch to me. Joe Louis number seven. Benny Leonard number eight. Sugar Ray Leonard number nine. That might be a little high considering, he lost a lot of time because of injuries and everything else. Hagler number 10. Maybe too high for him. Jack Johnson 11. Sam Langford, Canada's very own, number 12. Manny Pacquiao 13. Ooh, Floyd Mayweather fans not going to like that. Ezra Charles number 14. Archie Moore 15. Pernell Whitaker 16. Floyd Mayweather 17. 17 on this list. Joe Gans 18. Barney Ross 19. Gene Tunney 20. A lot of the haters are not going to like this list because there's far too many fighters of a certain race on it. Let's go to another list. Wikipedia. What's Wikipedia going to say? Wikipedia. No. Bleacher Report. Bleacher Report. A legitimate magazine, newspaper. Salvador Sanchez, number 50. Would have been real high considering of how terrible things were, right? So, Bleacher Report. Sugar Ray Robinson, number 1. Henry Armstrong, number 2. Willie Pep, number 3. Muhammad Ali, number 4. Joe Louis, number 5. Duran, number 6. Jack Johnson, 7. Jack Dempsey, that's pretty high for him, number 8. Benny Leonard, 9. Sugar Ray Leonard, 10. Greb, 11. Gans, 12. Langford, 13. Tunney, 14. Marciano, 15. Moore, 16. Jimmy Wild, the great UK fighter, 132 and 4-1 with 98 KOs. Mickey Walker, nice. Mickey Walker's right up there at 18. Julio Cesar Chavez, 19, ahead of Floyd. George Foreman at 20. Stanley Ketchel, number 21. Barney Ross, 22. Jimmy McLarnin, Tony Canzaneri, Joe Frazier, Jake LaMotta, Bernard Hopkins in front of Floyd. Ezra Charles, Floyd Mayweather, 29. But this guy said that Floyd Mayweather, of course, is number 1. You're only hating because you're anti-American. Anti-American. How is me having Sugar Ray Robinson, the number 1 fighter of all time, anti-American? When literally, as I told him, the majority of pound-for-pound lists, all time, legitimate ones, don't have Floyd Mayweather number 1. None that I've ever seen. This other quote is pretty interesting. This is a great matchup, obviously, coming up. I hope the winner takes on Ken Shiro. That's the fight I really want to see. This is a fight, Olympic gold medalist against former world champion, the amateur rivalry, the rivalry between the brothers, and they're desperate to win. I think it's a great matchup. Sonny Edwards versus Yafai. Whoever wins, I want to see them match up with Ken Shiro. For Ken Shiro, this is a fucking great name on his resume. Another Japanese fighter who people are going to find ways to shit on. But let's keep moving. So here's the current rankings of the lightweight division. And when you look at these rankings, I don't disagree. They're pretty good. Tank Davis at number one, even though in truth, the guy that should be number one is Lomachenko. Lomachenko has easily the best resume at 135. Leaps and bounds better than Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson. He also has 2 losses in the division, and that may be the difference between these guys being ranked above him. Whereas Shakur hasn't really had too many fights at the weight class. What, 2, 3 against elite fighters? No world champions. Tank Davis has been here for a number of years, never faced a world champion. The only guy who's faced multiple world champions at lightweight is Vasily Lomachenko. Petraza, Linares, Lopez, Haney, Kambosos. Maybe even one more. But at least 5 world champions he's faced and fought at 135 pounds. Tank Davis, 0. Shakur, 0. You let me know what you think. Obviously, as far as age and the point of their career, I can understand. At this point, you would have to favor Tank Davis and Shakur over the 37-year-old Lomachenko. But Lomachenko did do what some other fighters weren't able to do, which was literally stop George Kambosos. So there you are, Shakur at number 2, which is why people want to see Shakur Tank Davis fight, 1 versus 2. Loma 3, Zepeda at 4. That's why people were excited about Shakur versus Zepeda. Muratalla at number 5, Baranchek at number 6, De Los Santos at number 7, Keyshawn at number 8. I think in truth, you probably should put Keyshawn Davis above De Los Santos and Muratalla because I think he's got a better resume than both of them at the weight class. And he's a guy that's earned a world title fight against number 6 Baranchek. And he's going to beat Baranchek, which is going to elevate him probably into 1, 2, 3, and 4, just behind Lomachenko, Shakur, and Tank. And really, that's the position I think he belongs. The Russian fighter that Devin Haney beat years ago, Kambosos at 10, Frank Martin at 11. Again, I don't think Frank Martin is number 11. I think I'd put him above number 9 and number 10. I would love to see Frank Martin versus De Los Santos, right? I know Frank Martin's moving to 140, so it's unlikely that that fight can happen. But De Los Santos is a big dude. I think he's ultimately going to be a 140 as well. Of course, Kid Austin at number 12, who's going to be jumping up to face Shakur at number 2. Big ballsy move. Farmer at 13. I'm not sure who 14 is. Obviously, Mason at 15, which is fair, right? Mason is still a young fighter, still facing 8-round fights. So the fact they have him 15th, even though he's facing top 40, 50, 60 level opponents, what do you expect? You're fighting bum-ass fucking dudes, right? So you can only raise so high fighting that level of competition. They might be smart to throw him in with a guy like number 9, right? And then, of course, you got Andy Cruz at number 16. I definitely think Andy Cruz should be ranked above, Kid Austin, Farmer, whoever number 14 is, and in front of fucking Abdullah Mason. Because his resume, even in only like 4 fights, is way better than Abdullah Mason's resume. And in truth, you probably could put him in the top 10, right? You could take out number 9 and 10, put Frank Martin in there and Andy Cruz. And then your top 10 would be Tank Davis, Shakur, Lomachenko, Zepeda, Muratalla, Baranchek, Keyshawn, De Los Santos, Frank Martin, and Andy Cruz. And there you have a real legitimate top 10, right? With guys like the Russian kid, Kambosos, Kid Austin, Farmer, and Mason, just a level below them at this point, right? And I think that's the legitimate one. Where you want to put people in the rankings, up to you. But I think really that's kind of the way it should be formed right now. But let me know what you think. And then here, of course, we have here, what is the hardest weight class in boxing to become a champion, right? I know people are saying the 154-pound division is the hardest division or the best division in boxing. But it's most definitely not the hardest division to become a champion, because those titles at that class flipping fucking over consistently all the time. People are fucking getting upset and losing. It's the norm at 154. I would say the hardest weight class to become a champion is probably the heavyweight division, right? Because, you know, not many dudes are going to beat Alexander Usyk. And if Fury wins, not many dudes are beating Tyson Fury, right? It's a real tough competition. When you face Tyson Fury, you're giving up 40 to 50 pounds. Against Alexander Usyk, you're fighting a dude that's just on a whole different skill level than the majority of heavyweights. You could say Canelo Alvarez at 168, but I don't think Morrell would have beat him. I don't think Benavidez would have beat him. So truthfully, I don't know if there's anyone currently at 168 that could or would beat Canelo Alvarez at this time. So that might be one of the hardest divisions, right? Because I don't know if anyone there is beating him. You also have a New East division at 122. I don't know if there's anyone at 122 that's got fucking any chance of beating a Nui. Any chance. So 122, 168, and the heavyweight division probably are the three hardest divisions to win a world title. But let me know in the comment section what you think. And here we go. Back to the fucking king. Sugar Ray Robinson at one point had a record of 128-1. This is after he ended up having, I can't remember how many fucking wins at welterweight before he moved to middleweight and got his first loss. But I think he was 60 and something. He was like 60-0 before he ended up taking his first loss. And then after that first loss, he went on to end up going on to win another 60 fucking fights before another loss. 128-1. Possibly the greatest boxing record of all time. But yet people want to hype up Floyd Mayweather. And the irony is when people say 50-0, you're giving Floyd Mayweather credit for beating a fucking MMA fighter, making his boxing debut. Literally, you broke Marciano's record in what should have been what is it? An exhibition fight. That's what it was. It was an exhibition fight. There should have been no legitimacy to the Floyd Mayweather Conor McGregor fight. Just like there should be no legitimacy to Mike Tyson versus fucking Jake Paul. These are exhibition matches. There should be no legitimacy to it. They shouldn't be on these fighters' resumes, right? Because we know they're circus acts, shit shows. But these guys want to put Floyd Mayweather, the best fighter of all time, because he's 50-0. 50-0. Really. If Floyd was fighting like Sugar Ray Robinson was fighting back then, once a month, twice a month, right? Where you're getting like 24 fights in a year, you think he would have fucking went undefeated? You're fucking mental. That dude literally relocated to Vegas so he could get shots in his hands, so he could deal with fucking the brittleness of his fucking hands. He had to go to Vegas to do it because Vegas is the state that it's legal. He couldn't do it in New York or Philly or fucking Detroit or California because it's illegal to do what Floyd was doing to his hands in Vegas. But you're telling me this guy wouldn't have lost fights if he would have fought back in these days, just like Julio Cesar Chavez said? Come on, get fucked. Number one, pound for pound. People are fucking mental cases, man. And there we go. So who is the greatest lightweight of all time? Great conversation. Pernell Whitaker, Julio Cesar Chavez, Floyd Mayweather. I don't know if Floyd had a long enough reign and did enough at lightweight, but obviously he was a great fighter. Ike Williams, Roberto Duran, and Joe Gans. And you saw most of those pound for pound lists. the majority of them had Roberto Duran ranked number 6, right, on multiple lists. Right here, they say Roberto Duran fought across 7 weight divisions and 5 different decades, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. The incredible career of Roberto Duran. Hands of stone, right? The biggest thing that almost killed Duran was his no mas against Leonard, right? And we know that they used that against Duran, knowing that he was partying and celebrating his victory against Leonard, because it was the biggest thing to ever happen to Panama, probably in sports, in the history of fucking Panama. Roberto Duran beating Leonard, the golden boy, to become the welterweight champion of the world. And this is a guy who was already the lightweight champion, moved up to a welterweight, fought the best welterweight, and beat him to become the champion at welterweight. The gold medalist, the face of fucking American boxing at the time in Leonard. The man everybody loved. I love Leonard. I was such a Leonard fan. When he lost to Duran the first time, I was fucking heartbroken. But I was super excited when he beat him in the rematch. Even though now in hindsight, you grow older and you see exactly how Duran was kind of forced into that fight, kind of exploited and taken advantage of. And because of that, he ended up losing because he just wasn't prepared for the fight. And they knew that. And they took advantage of him. And obviously, you know, he had to deal with the no mas situation for a long time afterwards, which obviously mentally had an impact on him, which is why he lost a few fights, obviously lost to Benitez right afterwards as well, and then took a few other losses, losing to that UK fighter, Lang, and some other dudes before sort of picking it up later on and going on to have obviously great fights against, you know, Iran Barkley and obviously Hagler and others. But Duran was a monster. And, you know, what most of these people that are anti-Duran don't even focus on was the dominant lightweight career he had before he moved up, which is why he's in the conversation with these fighters as the best lightweight of all time. I definitely think his career at lightweight is better than Floyd's. He just did far more at that weight division. Uh, Obviously, I think Chavez had obviously a good career, but I wouldn't say he was a more dominant fighter at that weight class than Durant, even though there were some similarities between them. You look at the way he beat fucking, what's his face? Hector Macho Camacho, who was fucking kind of the Latin Sugar Ray Leonard, right? Really fucking fun fighter to watch, slick as fucking spit. And he just broke him down, punished him, hurt him. And then, of course, what he did to Taylor, which basically ruined his career. Pernell Whitaker was obviously a fucking unbelievable fighter at this weight class. Obviously, Joe Gans and Ike Williams, historically, I know they are two of the best, even though I can't say I watched them fight because it's a little before my time. I'm not quite that old, but it's definitely a conversation worth having, right? You can see what most of the pundits feel, but of course, a lot of pundits may be biased because they probably watched Duran through the majority of his career and probably only watched tape of Gans and Ike Williams. And to be fair, when you watch a lot of those older fight tapes, the fighters are very rudimentary, technically, in the way they fight, right? You know, they're not nearly as refined and skilled as fighters later on, because obviously people learned and improved as they move forward through the decades. And these are a few fights that have been confirmed. And this is what's great about boxing. I get so excited when I see confirmations. And obviously, Derek Chisora stepping with Jarrell Miller, reportedly being finalized for February 8th in Manchester. What a fucking great fight. Derek Chisora, right? The dude's literally fought fucking everyone. And the fact that he's been able to be so fucking competitive up until this point, where this probably is going to be the last fight of his career. And he's in with a really good opponent, a tough, rugged, fucking hard man in Jarrell Miller. And so it should be a great fight, a great fight. And obviously, if Chisora wins in Manchester, what a victory. He should totally retire. He's made millions of dollars in the process, even though he's lost double-digit losses, right? but he's going to be remembered as one of the best heavyweights during this era because of the level of opposition he's faced. Nobody has faced better competition in the heavyweight division than Chisora. Nobody, because he's literally fought everybody, right? He gave Usyk one of the hardest fights of Usyk's career, right? Especially at heavyweight. So, I'm excited to see him get a last big payday. I'm on the edge because he is getting old, and I'd rather not see fighters get hurt in the ring by staying in too late, especially at heavyweight, where you're getting hit by big men, and it only takes one shot to really fuck a dude up. So, while I worry about him, I'm happy to see him get his last final fight before leaving the sport of boxing, and hopefully he's able to represent the UK in a big way. And then, of course, the fight we all knew was coming, Keyshawn Davis versus Branchek for his WBO world title, right? We knew this is what was going to happen, and this makes tons of sense. I don't understand why Golden Boy Zepeda didn't chase after the WBO champion. They were originally the number one ranked fighter by the WBO. They could have easily pushed forward to get that fight and become a world champion, giving them some leverage to negotiate with Lomachenko, Shakur, or Tank Davis in unification fights. But I don't know. I'm not sad, though, that Keyshawn Davis is doing it. Obviously, Top Rank controls both Baranchek and Keyshawn, so it makes sense that this is a fight that's going to happen. You also still have Lomachenko at the IBF, so a potential unification fight between Keyshawn Davis and Lomachenko is something that could happen in 2025. And while it's not Tank Davis or Shakur Stevenson, it's a great fight. And still, I think, equally as dangerous, because I think Keyshawn Davis at this point is a fucking real tough fight for any of those guys, including Lomachenko, who's 37 years old. Also, we know that you have Muratalla, who is a top-ranked fighter and obviously highly ranked, who potentially might be able to fight for the IBF title if Lomachenko vacates it, so that potentially maybe Keyshawn Davis could face Raymond Muratalla in unification fight, which of course would be probably the way Top Rank would prefer things to unfold. But I'm happy to see this fight. I'm excited to see Keyshawn Davis against Branchek. Branchek's a tough fighter, a lot of experience. Obviously, I think he's 35 years old, so he's a little older as well. But I think a star is born is basically what we're going to see. Keyshawn's going to beat Branchek in a sensational fashion, become a world champion, and become a real legitimate player at 135. And at that point, you can't really make excuses for Tank Davis not wanting to fight him. That's a fucking unification fight. You can't make excuses. You don't want fighters to unify? Like, this is the funny thing about some boxing fans, right? They pretend to be boxing fans, but then they pick and choose what they want fighters to do, right? Oh, we want fighters to unify. Oh, but he doesn't need to unify. What's he going to gain from fighting this guy? Oh, we want guys to fight their mandatory. Oh, why is this guy fighting this bum? It's his mandatory, right? We just saw Junto Nakatani get criticized because he fought his mandatory that was mandated by the WBC. He did what he was supposed to do. You might not like the mandatory, but that's not fucking the boxer's fault. That's the sanctioning body's issue, right? If you got an issue, bring it up with fucking the WBC. Just like William Skull, nobody thought that was a good fight for fucking Canelo. Nobody wanted to see that fight. So then bring it up with the fucking IBF, right? Those are the people you need to address, not the boxers. They pay sanctioning fees. They do what they're told. Otherwise, they're going to potentially get stripped of the titles they worked so hard for. So it is what it is. And then, of course, coming up soon, Takai on the undercard, Anui Goodman. Obviously, I'm a huge Anui fan. I'm always excited to see the monster fight, especially in December. As I said earlier, a lot of great cards out of Japan. So I'm excited to see Anui versus Goodman. I'm kind of excited to see Goodman, to see what he can do, against Inouye, right? Because he's been in with good fighters. He beat TJ Dahoney. He beat Reese Salim. So now we'll throw him in with Inouye and see if he's able to be as effective as, say, Paro was, right? Because we weren't picking Paro to beat Sabria Matias, but he did upset the apple cart. Maybe Goodman will fucking shock the boxing world and upset Inouye. Maybe. Also, a question that is pointed at this point: who should Anthony Joshua fight next? I'm happy he's not fighting Daniel Dubois, because I did not see the point of him facing Daniel Dubois in a rematch, considering how terrible he looked in that fight. I did not see how he was going to make adjustments and do better in the rematch. I just figured he was going to get knocked out similarly against Daniel Dubois in the rematch. And what would be the point of doing that when potentially we could see him face Fury if Fury wins, loses, or draws against Usyk? We could potentially see him against Deontay Wilder. At this point, both of them are past their best. So having them face each other now is no different than when they were both champions, because it's still on a similar level, right? It's a big fight. It will sell. I'm excited. I'd like to see Deontay Wilder and AJ get one last big payday, right? I ain't a fucking Wilder hater. I'm excited to see them both fucking cash out. And it's a fight that I would be excited to see at this point. And I would think Wilder would feel pretty confident that he could fucking land a big right hand and get AJ the fuck out of there, like he always felt he could. We will see, right? So for me, those are the two fights that make the most sense. I don't see the point of any other matchup. Obviously, Fury is a huge fight in the UK, even though at this point, I don't know if anybody would really give Anthony Joshua much of a chance against Fury. We know Fury is not the biggest puncher, so that's the one benefit that, Anthony Joshua has. He'd be fighting a long fighter who would try to use his jab and box against him, right? So it would allow AJ to potentially be more aggressive and not have to be so defensive and sort of on his back foot. Against Wilder, it's a completely different fight, because in that fight, really the first guy to land a good shot is probably the guy that's going to score the knockout. So you could see both of them really being cautious until they have an opening, right? But nonetheless, it's still a great matchup. Who would you like to see AJ fight next? Is there any other potential opponents that you would put into that conversation? For me, I think no. I think you're going to put him in with one of these guys that you can sell a huge pay-per-view with. It makes the most sense. That's the fight to do. And I love this quote. This is the last thing we'll look at tonight, because this is perfect. It literally is what we say all the time. Canelo comes out and he released this on X or whatever, and he said, if he fought Charlo, he ducked Bivol. If he fought Bivol, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Beterbiev, he ducked Bivol. If he fought Benavidez, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Charlo, he ducked Benavidez. If he fought Bivol, he ducked Beterbiev. If he fought Beterbiev, he ducked Charlo. If he fought Benavidez, he ducked Beterbiev. If he fought Bivol, he ducked Benavidez. If he fought Charlo, he ducked Beterbiev. If he fought Benavidez, he ducked Bivol. If he fought Beterbiev, he ducked Benavidez. My brain is fried. And it's true. This is the truth. With all these people that are anti-Canelo Alvarez, this is really the truth. It doesn't matter who he fights. Charlo, Bivol, Beterbiev, Benavidez, right? All four of those fighters are great matchups. All four. Him fighting any of those guys are great fights that he should be getting praised for. Obviously, Charlo probably the least of the four. Beterbiev probably the most of the four, with Benavidez and Bivol in the middle. But nonetheless, Bivol already beat Canelo, right? So, you're rematching a guy who beat you comprehensively. So, Bivol just got beat by Beterbiev, who's a fucking monster. Benavidez is always a big fighter. Literally, he's the biggest out of all of them. And then Charlo was always seen as the best Charlo, right? The most athletic, the hardest puncher, right? Probably out of all the guys we talk here, probably the guy with the most physical gifts, right? So for Canelo to fight any of them, it's a great matchup. And for him to win those fights, it's fucking legacy. More legacy on his resume. But yet it doesn't matter because, like he says, if he fights one guy, he's going to be criticized for ducking others, right? And we know this is true because we saw this when he fought Bivol originally. And people were saying Bivol was a cherry pick. And they were saying he should have fought Beterbiev. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Thanks for watching. I'm going to go walk the dog before my landlord comes to pick up my rent. Thanks everyone for stopping by. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. And I will see you next time.